He was paralyzed for 20 years. No one knew his wheelchair was a CIA-engineered escape weapon for 2 decades. The world saw a broken man. Marcus Ashford sat motionless in his wheelchair, a victim of tragedy, a symbol of sacrifice gone wrong. His neighbors in Portland pitied him. His wife cared for him with exhausting devotion. His children watched their father fade into irrelevance year after year, trapped in a prison of paralyzed limbs and shattered dreams. But what if everything you saw was a lie? What if the wheelchair wasn't a cage, but a weapon? What if the paralyzed man was actually one of the most dangerous operatives the CIA ever deployed? This is the story of a deception so elaborate, so perfectly executed, that it fooled everyone, including the people Marcus loved most. Hidden within the frame of his medical wheelchair were compartments containing encrypted communication devices, micro-surveillance cameras, and an emergency escape mechanism powerful enough to propel him away from danger at speeds that would shock you. For 20 years, Marcus Ashford lived 2 lives: the helpless veteran everyone pitied, and the shadow operative who gathered intelligence, thwarted terrorist plots, and operated in plain sight where no one would ever suspect. But every lie has a price. Every secret eventually demands payment. And when the truth finally emerged, it didn't just destroy his cover, it devastated his family, shattered his marriage, and left Marcus questioning whether the mission was worth losing everything he held dear. How does a man sacrifice 2 decades of his life pretending to be paralyzed? What kind of technology could the CIA hide in a wheelchair? And most importantly, when the operation ended and he had to reveal the truth, could his family ever forgive him? If you want to discover one of the most shocking stories of espionage and sacrifice ever told, stay with us until the very end. And please, leave a comment telling us where you're rewatching this story from. We want to know how far these incredible tales reach. Don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this don't come around every day. Marcus Ashford never planned to become invisible. In fact, for most of his early career with the Central Intelligence Agency, he was anything but. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Marcus was a rising star in the Directorate of Operations, specializing in Eastern European intelligence gathering. Tall, athletic, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, he moved through the shadowy world of Cold War espionage with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. He met Eleanor Chen at a diplomatic reception in Washington during the winter of 1978. She was a translator for the State Department, brilliant with languages, graceful in a way that made Marcus forget his training about emotional attachments. They married within a year, and by 1980 they had 2 children. Jennifer, bright and curious, and Thomas, stubborn and fearless like his father. Portland, Oregon became their home base between Marcus's assignments. The city's gray skies and steady rain provided the perfect backdrop for a family trying to maintain normalcy despite a father who disappeared for weeks at a time on missions he could never discuss. Eleanor never asked too many questions. She understood the world her husband inhabited, even if she couldn't see into it. But in November of 1984, everything changed. Marcus was in East Berlin on a routine intelligence extraction operation. The mission was supposed to be simple: retrieve a Soviet defector who had information about weapons programs in Ukraine, get him across the border, and return home. But intelligence operations are never truly simple. Someone had talked. Someone always talks. The ambush happened near Checkpoint Charlie, in the cold darkness of a November evening. Marcus remembered the sound of boots on cobblestone, the sharp crack of gunfire, and then the explosion that tore through the building where he had been hiding with the defector. He woke up 3 days later in a CIA medical facility in West Germany, his legs wrapped in bandages, his future uncertain. The doctors gave him the news with clinical detachment: spinal damage, extensive nerve trauma, paralysis from the waist down. Recovery was possible, they said, but unlikely. Physical therapy might restore some function, but he would probably need a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Eleanor flew to Germany immediately. Marcus still remembered the look in her eyes when she first saw him in that hospital bed, the way her hand trembled when she touched his face. She didn't cry, not then. She was too strong for that, or maybe too shocked. But something between them shifted in that moment, something that would take years to fully understand. They returned to Portland in early 1985. Marcus officially retired from active field duty, accepting a medical discharge with full honors and a pension that would support his family. Neighbors brought casseroles and flowers. Friends from the agency visited once, twice, then gradually stopped coming. The world moved on, as it always does, leaving Marcus Ashford behind in his wheelchair. Another casualty of a war most people didn't even know was still being fought. Except that wasn't the whole story. 3 months after returning to Portland, Marcus received a visit from a man he had never met before. The man's name was irrelevant. In the intelligence community, names are currency, and this man wasn't spending his. He sat in Marcus's living room on a Tuesday afternoon, while Eleanor was at work and the children were at school, and he made an offer that would change everything. "What if you didn't have to be paralyzed?" the man asked. Marcus stared at him. "The doctor said." "I know what the doctors said. I'm not talking about what's physically wrong with you, Marcus, I'm talking about what people believe is wrong with you." And then the man explained Project Silent Sentinel. The CIA had been developing a long-term deep cover program designed to place operatives in positions where they would be completely above suspicion, Who suspects a man in a wheelchair of being a spy? Who pays attention to the disabled veteran sitting quietly in the corner of a coffee shop or a library or a government building? People see the wheelchair first, and they stop seeing the person inside it. But Marcus wasn't actually paralyzed, the man explained. The explosion in Berlin had caused temporary spinal trauma, yes, but he had already regained most of his mobility during those 3 months of supposed adjustment to his new life. The CIA had known this. They had facilitated his recovery in secret, away from Eleanor's knowledge, during his medical appointments and therapy sessions. The wheelchair they were offering him wasn't standard medical equipment. It had been engineered by the agency's technical services division, the same brilliant minds who created concealment devices, listening equipment, and weapons that looked like ordinary objects. This wheelchair contained compartments invisible to the naked eye, accessible only through specific touch sequences. Inside, encrypted satellite communication equipment, micro cameras with facial recognition software, emergency cash and documents, even a small caliber weapon. Most remarkably, the wheelchair had an emergency propulsion system powered by compressed nitrogen cylinders hidden in the frame. If Marcus ever needed to escape, he could activate a mechanism that would give him a burst of speed far beyond what any manual wheelchair could achieve, buying him precious seconds to get to safety before standing up and running. "You would be our eyes and ears in places we can't normally access," the man said. Trade conferences, academic symposiums, public events where foreign agents operate openly. They won't suspect someone like you. They won't even notice you. Marcus listened to all of this, his mind racing through the implications. "My family," he finally said. "Eleanor, the kids, they would have to believe I'm really paralyzed. Yes, for how long? We're thinking initially 10 years. Possibly longer depending on the operation's success. You're asking me to lie to my wife for 10 years, to let my children grow up thinking their father is disabled." The man leaned forward. "We're asking you to serve your country in a way that no one else can. The intelligence you could gather would be invaluable. Lives would be saved. Marcus, probably thousands of them." Marcus sat in his wheelchair, his real wheelchair, the ordinary one, and stared out the window at the Portland rain. He thought about Eleanor, about Jennifer and Thomas, about the life they had built together. He thought about the Soviet defector who had died in that explosion in Berlin, and about all the other people who had died or would die if intelligence operations failed. He thought about duty and sacrifice and the terrible weight of secrets. "I'll do it," he said. The man nodded unsurprised. "Training begins next week. Your family will think you're attending intensive physical therapy in Seattle. We'll make sure everything looks legitimate." And that's how Marcus Ashford disappeared into his wheelchair, beginning a double life that would span 2 decades and destroy almost everything he loved. If you want to know how Marcus managed this impossible deception, how he fooled everyone including his own family, and what shocking events nearly exposed him before his mission was complete, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button, leave us a comment, and share this story, because what comes next will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty and sacrifice. The truth is stranger and more devastating than you can imagine. Portland in the mid-1980s was a city still finding its identity. The rain-soaked streets of the Northwest District, the bridges spanning the Willamette River, the coffee shops that were just beginning to define what would become a cultural movement, all of it became Marcus Ashford's operational territory. To his neighbors on Thurman Street, Marcus was simply the quiet veteran in the blue house with the wheelchair ramp. Eleanor had insisted on the ramp's construction, had overseen every detail to make their home accessible. She never knew that Marcus didn't actually need it. That late at night when she was asleep, he would stand from his wheelchair and pace their bedroom, keeping his leg muscles functional, preventing the atrophy that would have occurred with real paralysis. The CIA's physical therapist came to the house 3 times a week, officially to help Marcus with exercises and mobility training. In reality, these sessions were operational briefings. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Brennan, who actually worked for the Technical Services Division, would close the door to Marcus's ground floor study and download intelligence requirements, provide equipment updates, and review his surveillance reports from the previous week. Marcus's wheelchair was a masterpiece of covert engineering. The right armrest contained a pressure-sensitive panel that, when touched in a specific sequence, would release a small compartment holding a camera no larger than a shirt button. The left wheel hub concealed encrypted communication equipment that could transmit data packets to CIA's satellites during brief windows when the satellites passed overhead. The seat cushion had a false bottom where Marcus could hide documents, microfilm, or in one memorable case, a hard drive containing stolen Soviet submarine specifications. The emergency propulsion system remained the wheelchair's most impressive feature. Compressed nitrogen cylinders were integrated into the chair's frame so seamlessly that even experienced engineers would miss them during casual inspection. If Marcus found himself in danger, he could grip both armrests in a specific way, triggering the release that would shoot him forward at nearly 15 miles per hour for approximately 8 seconds, enough time to reach cover or an exit before anyone could react. After that, he could stand up and run like any able-bodied person. But the technology was only part of the deception. The real challenge was maintaining the illusion every single day, in every interaction, with everyone he loved. Eleanor never suspected. How could she? She saw her husband struggle with the most basic tasks. She helped him transfer from wheelchair to bed each night, unaware that Marcus could have done it himself easily. She modified recipes to make cooking easier for someone seated, reorganized kitchen cabinets to be within his reach, installed grab bars in the bathroom. Every accommodation she made was born from love, and every one of them drove another splinter of guilt into Marcus's conscience. Jennifer and Thomas adapted to their father's disability with the resilience of children, though each in their own way. Jennifer, who was 7 when the accident happened, became protective and careful, always making sure Marcus had what he needed. Thomas, only 5, occasionally forgot his father couldn't walk and would run ahead, then stop and wait, with an apologetic look that broke Marcus's heart every time. The missions themselves varied in scope and danger. Sometimes Marcus would spend weeks doing nothing but observing, sitting in his wheelchair at Powell's Books or in Washington Park, photographing individuals who matched descriptions of foreign intelligence operatives. Other times, the work was more active. In 1987, Marcus attended an international technology conference at the Portland Convention Center. His presence raised no eyebrows. The event organizers were pleased to be so accessible to disabled attendees. What they didn't know was that Marcus had been sent specifically to track a Bulgarian intelligence officer, suspected of acquiring classified American semiconductor designs. For 3 days, Marcus positioned himself near the exhibition hall's main corridor, his button camera capturing every face, his encrypted phone transmitting data in real time. On the conference's final day, Marcus followed the Bulgarian to a meeting in a hotel room. The wheelchair allowed him access to areas where a suspicious-looking able-bodied man might have been questioned. Security guards held doors for him. People moved aside to let him pass. He was invisible in plain sight. He parked his wheelchair near the hotel room's door, adjusting his position as if tired, while his equipment recorded audio through a laser microphone disguised as a medical monitor attached to his chair. The conversation he captured led to the arrest of 3 American engineers and prevented the transfer of technology worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Eleanor thought he had been at a support group for veterans. The lies piled up like sediment, layer upon layer, year after year. Marcus told Eleanor he was going to medical appointments when he was actually meeting his handler. He claimed fatigue when he needed time alone to review intelligence files. He invented pain and complications to explain why certain treatments weren't working, why he wasn't improving, why he would probably be in this wheelchair forever. The strain of maintaining 2 separate lives began to show in ways Marcus couldn't fully control. He became distant, emotionally unavailable. Eleanor attributed this to depression, a natural response to disability and loss. She suggested therapy, which Marcus attended actual therapy this time with a CIA psychologist cleared to know his real situation but bound by secrecy agreements. The psychologist warned that long-term deception of this magnitude was psychologically unsustainable, that the cognitive dissonance would eventually cause serious problems. Marcus ignored the warning. The mission was too important, but there were close calls, moments when the carefully constructed fiction almost collapsed. In 1991, a new neighbor moved in next door, a retired Navy corpsman named Harold who had worked in rehabilitation medicine. He took an interest in Marcus, often stopping by to chat about adaptive equipment and therapy techniques. One afternoon, Harold noticed something odd. The muscle tone in Marcus's legs seemed unusually well developed for someone with long-term paralysis. "You know, Marcus," Harold said carefully, watching him in the wheelchair, "your legs don't look atrophied to me. You must have an incredible physical therapy routine." Marcus felt his pulse spike but kept his expression neutral. "The VA set me up with some electrical stimulation therapy. It's supposed to maintain muscle mass even though I can't use them really. I haven't seen that work so well before." "What's the protocol?" Marcus invented details on the spot, making it technical enough to sound legitimate. Harold seemed satisfied, but from that day forward, Marcus made sure to occasionally skip his secret nighttime exercises, allowing some atrophy to set in just enough to be believable. It meant his actual physical fitness deteriorated slightly, but operational security demanded it. Another near disaster occurred in 1994 during a family vacation to Seattle. They were staying in a hotel, and Marcus had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion. In reality, he had an operational meeting with another agent who was passing through the city. He slipped out of the hotel room at 2 in the morning, leaving his wheelchair behind and walking to the meeting location 6 blocks away. The intelligence exchange took longer than expected. When Marcus returned to the hotel, he found Eleanor awake, sitting in the dark, staring at his empty wheelchair. "I woke up and you were gone," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry, just confused and hurt. Marcus's mind raced. "I couldn't sleep. I transferred to the regular chair and went to the lobby. I didn't want to wake you." "What regular chair?" "The hotel loaned me one. Mine is too bulky for the elevator." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus wondered if she could see through the lie, if 17 years of marriage had given her some instinct for detecting deception. But finally she nodded, exhaustion overcoming suspicion. "Come back to bed," she said. That night, Marcus lay awake listening to Eleanor breathe, knowing that he was becoming someone she didn't really know, wondering if he even knew himself anymore. The children grew older, their lives expanding beyond the family home. Jennifer went to college, majoring in international relations, and Marcus felt a bitter irony watching her study the same world he secretly operated in. Thomas became more rebellious, frustrated by what he saw as his father's resignation, his unwillingness to fight harder for recovery. "Why won't you try experimental treatments?" Thomas demanded during an argument in 1996. He was 17, angry in the way teenagers are when they feel powerless. "There are new therapies, stem cell research. You just sit there like you've given up." Marcus wanted to tell him the truth so badly in that moment, wanted to stand up from the wheelchair and prove that he hadn't given up, that he was doing something important, something meaningful. Instead, he said what the mission required. "Some things can't be fixed, son. Sometimes you have to accept reality." Thomas stormed out, and Marcus sat in his wheelchair, his prison, his weapon, his lie, and wondered what price was too high for duty. What you think about what you've witnessed so far? Could you maintain such a devastating deception with your own family? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because the emotional cost is about to get much worse, and the danger much more real. By the late 1990s, Marcus Ashford had been living his double life for nearly 15 years. Project Silent Sentinel had been remarkably successful. Marcus and a handful of other operatives in similar positions had gathered intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks, identified foreign agents, and provided critical information during some of the most sensitive moments of post-Cold War international relations. But success in espionage is measured in secrets kept and crises averted, things that families never see, sacrifices that receive no recognition. At home, the price of those successes was mounting in ways that Marcus could no longer ignore. Eleanor had changed. The vibrant, confident woman he married had become someone quieter, more withdrawn. She still cared for him with dedication, still managed their household with efficiency, but something essential had dimmed in her eyes. She had friends, activities, a part-time job teaching Mandarin at Portland State University. But Marcus could see the loneliness that shadowed her. They no longer talked the way they used to. Conversations had become transactional. "Did you take your medication? Do we need groceries? What time is your appointment tomorrow?" The intimate connection that had drawn them together 20 years earlier had been slowly strangled by the web of lies Marcus lived within. In 1998, Eleanor suggested marriage counseling. They sat in Dr. Patricia Holloway's office in Northwest Portland, rain streaking the windows, the counselor's kind eyes moving between them as she asked gentle questions about their relationship. Marcus felt like he was in a particularly cruel form of interrogation, one where he couldn't tell the truth but was expected to be emotionally honest. "Eleanor," Dr. Holloway said, "what do you feel is missing from your marriage?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Marcus's chest tighten. "I feel like I lost my husband twice. Once in Berlin when the explosion happened, and again slowly over the years since then. The man I married was engaged with the world, passionate about his work, present with me and the children. Now he's just distant, like he's here physically but gone everywhere else." Marcus, how do you respond to that? What could he say? That she was absolutely right. That the distance she felt was real because he was living a secret life she couldn't know about. That every day he spent in the wheelchair was another day of lying to her. "The disability has been difficult," he said, hating how hollow the words sounded. "I think I've struggled more with depression than I've admitted. I'm sorry I've been distant." They continued counseling for several months, but it couldn't fix what was fundamentally broken. You can't heal a marriage built on deception, no matter how skilled the therapist. Eventually, Eleanor stopped scheduling appointments, and they returned to their polite, distant coexistence. The children's departure from home made the emptiness more obvious. Jennifer graduated from the University of Oregon and took a job with an NGO in Washington, D.C. Thomas joined the Marines, perhaps seeking the kind of purpose and intensity he felt his father had abandoned. The house on Thurman Street felt larger, quieter, filled with unspoken words and hidden truths. And then came the close calls that made Marcus realize just how fragile his constructed reality truly was. In September 2001, everything changed. The attacks on New York and Washington sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency in America. Marcus received emergency operational instructions, increase surveillance of potential terrorist cells in the Pacific Northwest, attend interfaith community meetings where radicalization might be occurring, monitor international shipping through Portland's port facilities. The wheelchair gave him access to places others couldn't easily reach. Who would suspect a disabled veteran attending community meetings of being an intelligence operative? Who would notice the man in the wheelchair sitting quietly in the back of a mosque or a community center? His equipment capturing faces and conversations. But the increased operational tempo meant more lies, more absences, more strain on his already fracturing home life. Eleanor noticed the change, the sudden urgency in his supposed support group meetings and medical appointments. "You're going out a lot lately," she observed one evening in October 2001. There was something in her tone, a sharpness that Marcus hadn't heard before. "The veterans community is pretty active right now. A lot of us are struggling with memories that the attacks brought back up." "Marcus, what were you really doing in Berlin?" The question caught him completely off guard. In all the years, Eleanor had never directly questioned the official story. "What do you mean?" I mean, what was your actual mission? I know you were in intelligence, not just a logistics officer like you told everyone. The explosion that supposedly paralyzed you, what were you really doing when it happened? Marcus felt the operational security walls slam down in his mind. Eleanor, you know I can't talk about classified work. It was 17 years ago. Surely it's been declassified by now. Some things never get declassified. She stared at him, and in her eyes Marcus saw something that terrified him more than any enemy agent ever had. Doubt, not just about Berlin, but about everything. Are you really paralyzed? She asked quietly. Time seemed to stop. Marcus's training kicked in, his face remaining perfectly neutral even as alarms surged through him. This was the nightmare scenario, the question that could unravel everything. What kind of question is that? I don't know anymore. There are nights when I wake up and you're not in bed. You say you transferred to the other chair, but I never hear you do it. You're always so careful when I'm awake. But at night sometimes I hear sounds, movement that doesn't match someone who can't use their legs. Eleanor, I think the stress of everything is making you imagine. Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't tell me I'm imagining things. I'm not crazy. Marcus, something is wrong. Something has been wrong for years. And you won't tell me what it is. Marcus wanted desperately to tell her everything in that moment. The mission, the wheelchair, the lies, all of it. But his training, his commitment to operational security, the years of conditioning prevented him. I'm exactly who you see, a disabled veteran trying to live his life. I'm sorry if I haven't been the husband you deserve, but my condition is real. Eleanor looked at him for a long time, tears forming in her eyes. I don't believe you, she whispered. Then she left the room, and Marcus sat alone in his wheelchair. The weapon and prison he had chosen, knowing that something fundamental had just broken between them. The incident with the wheelchair repairman happened 3 weeks later. The CIA sent a technician to perform routine maintenance on Marcus's chair, updating the encrypted communication systems and replacing the nitrogen cylinders in the propulsion mechanism. The appointment was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon when Eleanor was teaching, but her class was cancelled, and she came home early to find a man disassembling Marcus's wheelchair in their garage, exposing compartments and equipment that clearly had nothing to do with medical mobility. Marcus arrived home from an operational meeting to find Eleanor standing in the garage doorway, staring at the wheelchair's exposed interior with an expression of complete shock. The technician had frozen, looking to Marcus for guidance on how to handle the security breach. Eleanor, Marcus began. What is that? She pointed at the communication equipment, the hidden compartments. What the hell is all of that? The technician quickly reassembled the wheelchair and left without a word, leaving Marcus to face his wife's demand for truth. He made a decision in that moment, one that went against every protocol but felt like the only humane choice. He told her a partial truth. It's CIA equipment. I've been consulting for them, using my network of veteran contacts to gather information about potential domestic threats. The wheelchair modifications let me communicate securely. You've been spying. Here in Portland. Gathering information, not spying. It's legitimate intelligence work, Eleanor. I couldn't tell you because it's classified. She processed this, her expression cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been understanding how long, since the mid-90s. And you couldn't trust me with this, your own wife. It wasn't about trust. It was about operational security and keeping you safe. If you didn't know, you couldn't be compromised. Eleanor stood there in their garage, surrounded by the tools and domestic normalcy of suburban life, staring at the husband she thought she knew. I don't know who you are anymore, she said finally. I'm not sure I ever did. She didn't leave him. Not then, but something died in their marriage that day. Something that would never come back. Thank you so much for staying with this story until this point. We know it's been intense, emotional, and possibly uncomfortable. But trust us when we say that the best and most shocking parts are still ahead. Marcus's world is about to completely collapse in ways you cannot anticipate. Stay with us. The years between 2002 and 2004 were perhaps the loneliest of Marcus Ashford's life. He continued his work for Project Silent Sentinel, but the joy, if it could ever be called that, had drained from the mission. Eleanor knew part of the truth now, but that partial knowledge had only created more distance between them. She understood he was still working for the CIA, but she didn't know the full scope of the deception, didn't know that her husband could actually walk. The wheelchair had become less of a disguise and more of a barrier between them, a physical representation of the lies that had defined their marriage. Eleanor stopped helping him with transfers and daily tasks, her assistance replaced by cold efficiency. They lived as roommates in the same house, to people whose lives had diverged so completely that finding their way back to each other seemed impossible. Then in March 2004, Marcus received the call he had been both expecting and dreading. His handler, now a senior officer in the Directorate of Operations, requested a meeting at a secure location in Seattle. When Marcus arrived, driving himself in a specially modified van that he didn't actually need but maintained for cover, the handler delivered news that would change everything. Project Silent Sentinel is being shut down. The handler said, the operational security compromises have become too frequent. The domestic surveillance concerns too problematic in the current political climate. All operatives in the program are being withdrawn. Marcus sat in his wheelchair, processing the implications. What's the withdrawal protocol? Gradual recovery. Over the next 6 to 8 months, you'll begin showing signs of improvement. Physical therapy appears to be working unexpectedly well. Motor function returns slowly. By the end of the year, you're mobile again, using a walker, then a cane. Eventually, you recover enough to walk unassisted. And my family. The handler's expression was neutral but not unsympathetic. That's your decision. Some operatives in similar programs have maintained the cover story of unexpected recovery. Others have chosen to tell their families the truth. The agency will support either choice, though obviously complete disclosure creates some security concerns. Marcus thought about Eleanor, about the look in her eyes when she had discovered the equipment in his wheelchair. He thought about Jennifer and Thomas, now adults living their own lives, who had spent their formative years believing their father was disabled. He thought about 20 years of lies, of sacrifices made and prices paid. I need to tell them the truth, he said. The handler nodded slowly. Understand that if you do, there's no going back. Your relationship with your family will change permanently. Most marriages don't survive this kind of revelation. My marriage is already destroyed. At least the truth might give us a chance at honest closure. The process of Marcus's recovery began. In April, he informed Eleanor that his doctors had proposed an experimental treatment protocol, a combination of stem cell therapy and intensive physical rehabilitation that showed promising results in other paralysis patients. Eleanor received this news with skepticism but didn't object. By this point, Marcus suspected she had stopped caring about his medical condition one way or another. Over the following months, Marcus performed the carefully choreographed act of gradual improvement. First, sensation allegedly returning to his legs, then small movements, twitches that suggested nerve regeneration. In July, he stood for the first time in 20 years with the support of parallel bars. Eleanor watching from the doorway of the physical therapy clinic with an expression Marcus couldn't read. By September, Marcus was using a walker. By November, a cane. The neighbors on Thurman Street called it a miracle. Friends from the veterans community celebrated his remarkable recovery. But Eleanor knew something was wrong. She had lived with Marcus for too long, knew his tells, his patterns. The recovery was too smooth, too controlled, as if he had never forgotten how to walk. In December 2004, Marcus made his decision. He invited Eleanor, Jennifer, and Thomas to the house for what he told them was an important family meeting. Jennifer flew in from D.C. Thomas took leave from his Marine posting in California. They gathered in the living room on a cold Sunday afternoon, rain pattering against the windows, the gray Portland light filtering through the curtains. Marcus stood in front of them, not sat in his wheelchair, which was visible in the corner of the room like an accusation. He saw the confusion on Jennifer's face, the suspicion on Thomas's, the resignation on Eleanor's. I need to tell you something, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the chaos of emotion inside him. Something I should have told you years ago, but couldn't. Something that's going to hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. More sorry than I can adequately express. Dad, what's going on? Jennifer asked. Marcus took a breath and committed to the truth. I was never paralyzed. The explosion in Berlin injured me, yes, but I recovered within a few months. The CIA recruited me for a long-term undercover operation that required me to pretend to be disabled. The wheelchair, the mobility problems, all of it was an act. For 20 years I've been living a lie. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus watched their faces, saw the progression of disbelief, confusion, and then dawning horror as they understood what he was saying. Thomas was the first to speak, his voice tight with rage. You're saying you could walk this entire time? That you let us grow up thinking our father was paralyzed when you weren't? The mission required fuck the mission. Thomas was on his feet, his Marine training evident in his controlled aggression. You lied to us, every single day for 20 years. You lied to your own children. Jennifer was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Why would you do that to us? To Mom. Marcus tried to explain about Project Silent Sentinel, about the intelligence gathered, the lives saved, the importance of the work. But even as he spoke, he could hear how hollow it sounded, how inadequate those justifications were in the face of what he had done to his family. Eleanor hadn't said a word. She sat perfectly still, her face pale, and when Marcus finally looked at her directly, he saw something in her eyes that was worse than anger. It was the absence of feeling, the look of someone who had already mourned and moved on. Eleanor, he said quietly, I know this is, you let me take care of you, she interrupted, her voice eerily calm. For 20 years I adjusted my entire life around your supposed disability. I gave up career opportunities, rearranged our home, helped you with tasks you could have done yourself. I felt guilty every time I felt frustrated or tired or wished things were different. I blamed myself for not being patient enough, caring enough, and all of it was a lie. I was trying to serve my country. The intelligence I gathered prevented. I don't care. Eleanor stood up, her composure finally cracking. I don't care about your missions or your intelligence or how many lives you think you saved. You could have trusted me. In 25 years of marriage, you could have found a way to let me in on the truth, but you chose not to. That's what this really was, Marcus. Not duty or patriotism. It was a choice you made to lie to me every single day. If you had known, it would have compromised operational security. Then you should have refused the mission. Her voice rose, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. You should have told the CIA that you wouldn't lie to your family for 20 years. But you didn't, because the mission was always more important than us. We were just the cover story that made you look normal. Marcus had no defense against that truth. She was absolutely right. Thomas left first, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Jennifer followed after a few minutes, pausing only to say, I need time to process this. Dad, don't contact me for a while. Then Eleanor stood, collected her purse, and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Marcus asked. To my sister's house. I'll send someone for my things tomorrow. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce. Eleanor, please. Can we at least talk? She laughed, a bitter sound. We haven't really talked in 20 years. Marcus, we've just been acting out roles you assigned us in whatever operation you were running. I'm done performing. I'm done with all of it. She left, and Marcus stood alone in the living room of the house they had shared for decades. The truth finally spoken, but far too late to save anything that mattered. The story is almost at its conclusion, but you need to stay until the very end to understand the final chapter of Marcus Ashford's incredible and heartbreaking journey. If you've made it this far, it means you're invested in this story, and we're so grateful for that. Please, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so you don't miss the amazing stories we have coming next. The conclusion will surprise you, and maybe even give you hope that redemption is possible even after the deepest betrayals. The divorce was finalized in the spring of 2005. Eleanor retained the house on Thurman Street. Marcus moved to a small apartment in southeast Portland, a one-bedroom place with stairs he climbed easily without the wheelchair that had defined 2 decades of his life. The CIA processed his official retirement with the usual mix of gratitude and efficiency. There was a small ceremony, classified of course, where senior officials praised his service to Project Silent Sentinel. They presented him with commendations he could never display publicly, thanked him for sacrifices that would never be acknowledged. Marcus accepted it all with the emotional distance of someone still processing the cost of those sacrifices. The intelligence community moved on, as it always does. New operations, new priorities, new officers who had never heard of Marcus Ashford, or the operatives who had pretended to be disabled for their country. In the classified world, he had been remarkably successful. In the real world, he had lost everything. The first year after the revelation was the darkest. Thomas refused all contact, returning Marcus's letters unopened, blocking his phone number. Jennifer maintained minimal communication, brief emails that were polite but distant. Eleanor's silence was complete and absolute. Marcus's world contracted to his small apartment, his therapy sessions with a CIA psychologist, and the growing realization that he didn't know who he was without the mission that had defined him. Depression settled over him like the Portland rain, constant and gray. There were days when Marcus stood at his apartment window, looking down at the street below, wondering if a life built entirely on deception had been worth living at all. The intelligence reports he had filed, the terrorist plots he had helped prevent, the foreign agents he had identified, did any of it balance against the devastation he had caused the people he loved? But slowly, incrementally, Marcus began the work of becoming a real person again. He started volunteering at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, working with soldiers who were actually dealing with the disabilities he had only pretended to have. The irony wasn't lost on him, but the work felt like a form of penance, a way to serve without lies. He listened to their stories, learned about their struggles, and felt genuine shame for having used disability as a costume for 20 years. One of the veterans he worked with was a young Marine named David who had lost both legs in Iraq. David's determination and resilience reminded Marcus of Thomas at that age. During one of their conversations, Marcus found himself telling David a version of his own story, not the classified details, but the emotional truth of having prioritized duty over family and regretting it too late. My son won't speak to me, Marcus admitted. He's a Marine too, actually. I made choices that hurt him badly, and I don't know if he'll ever forgive me. David was quiet for a moment, adjusting his prosthetic leg. You know what my dad told me after I got injured? He said that Marines never give up on their brothers. Maybe your son needs time, but if he's cause, he understands service and sacrifice. He'll come around, or he won't. But you can't give up on trying to reach him. That conversation changed something in Marcus. He stopped waiting passively for his children to forgive him and started actively trying to bridge the gap, not through letters or phone calls they would ignore, but through actions. In 2007, Marcus learned that Jennifer's NGO was struggling financially. Without telling her, he donated a significant portion of his CIA pension to the organization. When the donation was traced back to him, Jennifer called for the first time in 2 years. Why did you do that? She asked. Her tone was guarded but not hostile. Because the work your organization does is important, and because I want to support you, even if you can't forgive me. I'm working on forgiveness, Dad. It's just hard. Every childhood memory I have is now colored by the knowledge that you were lying through all of it. I know, and I can't change that, but I want you to know that my love for you was never a lie, even if everything else was. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a conversation, a beginning. Thomas took longer. Marcus learned through Jennifer that his son had been deployed to Afghanistan, had seen combat, had earned commendations for bravery. Marcus sent letters to Thomas's unit, not expecting responses, just wanting his son to know he was proud of him. The letters went unanswered for 3 years. Then in 2010, Marcus received a phone call from a military hospital in Germany. Thomas had been wounded by an IED, had suffered a serious leg injury that would require extensive rehabilitation. Marcus flew to Germany immediately. When he arrived at the hospital, Thomas was awake, his leg in traction, his face pale with pain and medication. He stared at Marcus with an expression that mixed surprise, resentment, and something that might have been relief. "You came," Thomas said. "Of course I came. You're my son. Even though I've ignored you for 6 years. Even though—" Thomas was quiet for a long time, looking at his injured leg, perhaps understanding for the first time what it meant to face long-term recovery, to deal with mobility challenges, to fear that your body would never be the same. "The doctors say I'll recover," he finally said. "Might need a cane for a while, but I'll walk again." "You will. You're tougher than you know." "Were you scared?" Thomas asked suddenly. "When you pretended to be paralyzed, were you scared of being found out?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Every single day. But I was more scared of what would happen when the truth came out. And I was right to be scared. I lost everything that mattered." "Why did you do it then?" "Because I believed it was important. Because I thought saving lives I would never meet was worth sacrificing the life I had. I was wrong, Thomas. Service matters, duty matters, but not at the cost of the people you love. I learned that too late." Thomas stared at his father, and Marcus saw tears forming in his son's eyes. "I understand service, Dad. I get why you thought it was important. But I needed you. We all needed you, and you chose to be someone else instead. I know, and I'm sorrier than I can ever express." They didn't resolve everything in that hospital room. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too profound. But when Marcus left Germany a week later, Thomas had agreed to stay in contact, to try to rebuild some form of relationship. It was more than Marcus had hoped for. The reconciliation with Eleanor never came. Not really. She remarried in 2011, a professor of linguistics at Portland State University, someone who Marcus hoped treated her better than he had. He sent a gift when he heard about the wedding, and Eleanor sent a brief thank you note. It was civil, polite, and marked the final closing of that chapter. But in 2013, Eleanor was diagnosed with breast cancer. The disease progressed quickly, and by early 2014 she was in hospice care. Jennifer called Marcus and asked if he wanted to visit. "She says she'll see you, if you want to come." Marcus went to the hospice on a February afternoon. The Portland rained steady as always. Eleanor looked small in the hospital bed, her hair gone from chemotherapy, her body frail in a way that had nothing to do with pretense or lies. She smiled when she saw him, a genuine smile that reminded him of the woman he had married 36 years earlier. "Marcus," she said, her voice weak, "you look old." He laughed despite the tears in his eyes. "So do you. Sit down. Tell me about your life." So he did. He told her about his work at the VA hospital, about his volunteering with disabled veterans, about slowly rebuilding relationships with Jennifer and Thomas. He told her about the therapy, the regrets, the long process of learning to be honest after decades of deception. Eleanor listened, occasionally nodding, her hand resting on top of the blanket. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked. "The mission, the intelligence you gathered, do you think it balanced out?" Marcus had thought about this question for years, had examined it from every angle, had discussed it endlessly in therapy. "No," he said honestly. "I saved lives, prevented attacks, served my country effectively, but I destroyed my family in the process. That's not a balanced equation. If I could go back, I would refuse the mission. I would choose you, choose the kids, choose a normal life with the people I loved. The world would have figured out its problems without me." Eleanor smiled sadly. "That's the right answer, but you couldn't have known it then. You were young. You believed in the mission. We all make choices that seem right at the time. Do you forgive me?" Marcus asked, the question he had wanted to ask for years but had never dared. "I forgave you a long time ago," Eleanor said. "I had to, for my own peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean things could have been different. We had a life together, Marcus. Parts of it were good, and parts of it were built on lies. Both things are true." She died 3 weeks later, surrounded by Jennifer and Thomas and his second husband. Marcus attended the funeral, standing in the back of the church, and he mourned not just Eleanor but the life they could have had if he had made different choices. In the years that followed, Marcus continued his work with veterans, and slowly, carefully, rebuilt relationships with his children. Jennifer eventually married and had 2 children of her own. Marcus became Grandpa Marcus, a role he embraced with a kind of presence and honesty he wished he had given his own children. Thomas left the Marines and became a physical therapist, working with wounded soldiers, perhaps understanding his father's choices better through his own service. On Marcus's 75th birthday in 2021, both of his children came to visit him at his apartment. They brought their families, and for a few hours, Marcus's small living space was filled with the noise and chaos of grandchildren playing, of adult conversations and laughter. It wasn't the family he had imagined when he married Eleanor all those years ago, but it was real, built on truth rather than deception. That evening, after everyone had left, Marcus sat by his window and looked out at the Portland skyline. The wheelchair the CIA had given him sat in his closet, a relic of another life, a reminder of the price of secrets. He thought about all the intelligence reports he had filed, the foreign agents he had identified, the terrorist plots that had been disrupted because of information he provided. Lives had been saved, he was certain of that. But the cost had been his own life, or at least the life he could have had. Was it worth it? That question had haunted him for years, and he still didn't have a complete answer. Service mattered, duty mattered, but so did love, and family, and the simple honesty of being who you truly are with the people you care about. In the end, Marcus Ashford had been both a hero and a betrayer, a successful operative and a failed husband and father. He had served his country with remarkable dedication and had paid a price that could never be fully calculated. The wheelchair had been his weapon, his cover, and his cage a symbol of sacrifice that was both noble and tragic. As he sat there in the gathering darkness, Marcus made peace with the contradictions of his life. He couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the lies or reclaim the lost years, but he could live honestly now, could be present with his family, could try to be the grandfather he had never quite managed to be as a father. The rain continued to fall on Portland, constant and cleansing, and Marcus Ashford, former operative, retired spy, imperfect man, watched it and found a measure of peace in the simple truth of being himself. So there you have it, it's a remarkable, heartbreaking story of Marcus Ashford, a man who served his country from the shadows, sacrificed his family on the altar of duty, and spent the rest of his life trying to find redemption for choices that seemed right at the time but destroyed almost everything he loved. What do you think? Was Marcus a hero or a villain? Could you have made the same choices in his position? Would you sacrifice 20 years of your family's trust for a mission you believed was important? These are not easy questions, and there are no simple answers. We want to hear from you in the comments. Tell us what you think about Marcus's choices. Tell us your name, what city and state you're watching from. Share this story with someone who would appreciate it. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the incredible true stories we bring you every week, stories of sacrifice, courage, betrayal, and redemption that will make you think about life in new ways. There's another amazing story queued up for you right now, appearing on your screen. Click on it, because if you loved this story, you're going to love what's coming next. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about these remarkable human experiences. Until next time, remember that every life contains mysteries, and the truth is always more complicated than it appears.